Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Thanks, everybody. We're live now. Welcome to anybody who's watching online, and welcome back, councillors. Also to Rachel Dean, our independent chair of RAC, has joined us. Also, we've got a few more staff, so welcome along. No media for this one. No, and is Linda joining us online? Maybe. Okay, otherwise we have an apology from Ray Curnow for this session as well. So welcome to Laura Knight. Laura's a senior associate at FVM, and we have spoken in the past about health and safety and our responsibility as elected members versus council staff, etc., etc. So Laura's here to actually help us understand all of that and take it through. So I'll hand it over to you, Laurie. Would you like to take questions as we go or hold them till the end?
Sometimes you get to something that's going to answer the question.
Okay, thanks, councillors. If we can keep our questions to the end, that'll be appreciated. So we're in your hands.
So Laurie, just can you press the button, the right-hand silver button, when you're ready to talk? Yeah, because that will pick up the voice.
Thank you for that welcome. I am a senior associate at Fletcher Vauthier Moore, which is in Nelson, Richmond, Motueka and Takaka, top of the south. I've specialised in my career in employment law, but employment is a fairly broad field. It encompasses health and safety, privacy, a number of issues that all intersect with employment generally. And of course, health and safety tends to have a very large intersection with employment law. I understand that you will have all had previous briefings on health and safety. So there might be a bit of overlap in terms of today, but I do hope that everyone will take something away from today. And I would like to begin at the beginning in terms of high level concepts, just to make sure that we can carry those all the way through, because they do come into play when we look at sort of the details of things from the big picture down. So, big button, little button. Oops. Okay, so these are the things we're going to touch on today. First, the overview of the legislation, the scope of it, the key duties. I like to call it the hassle. I find it goes, it's easier to say than the HSW. We'll touch on who is an officer and get at unpacking the due diligence duty that is probably centre of mind. Talk a bit about liabilities and penalties, and that is closely related to lessons from the two big prosecutions that have happened over the last few years. And of course, in the news right now is the legislative changes that have been proposed by the current government. There's a bill at second reading in Parliament that has been getting a bit of publicity recently. So I'll touch on that as well, and the changes that it might bring. So, okay. Now, you probably heard about New Zealand's relatively high rate of workplace injuries and deaths, particularly because New Zealand has so many primary industries, agriculture, forestry. They tend to be more dangerous industries that a larger proportion of our population works in. And this is the last place I need to tell you that the Pike River mine disaster was obviously the biggest driver for bringing in the Hassall Act in 2015. The law did fundamentally change workplace health and safety law because it did put a positive duty on officers. But there's also a focus on top to bottom, that everyone in an organization has responsibilities to keep themselves and the people they work with safe. It's not something that anyone can just leave to anyone else. There were increased penalties and powers for WorkSafe, the regulator, significant fines brought in, and fines and jail time potentially as a criminal matter for company officers. And of course, there's always the possibility of reputational damage, even where those sort of legal penalties don't arise. It was part of the fashion in New Zealand of having principle-based legislation. It's particularly relevant in an area like health and safety where one size does not fit all. I mean, the range of industries and sizes of employers and types of work sites means it would be impossible to set very prescriptive rules for each type of organization. Therefore, it's about principles. And that means a lot of gray area and a lot of judgment. On the other hand, it means that a lot of businesses and organizations say they find it difficult to work out exactly what their obligations are because they're just working with principles. What is reasonably practicable, for example. So it's up to each organization, or sometimes industry sectors do it together, to try to identify the risks and ways to mitigate them in their own operations. I wanted to highlight right from the start that mental health is included. It's not just physical health. Traditionally, physical health has been the focus, obviously. You know, falls from heights, dealing with machinery and equipment, but hopefully you've all heard the buzzwords, psychosocial risks. Those are things like bullying and harassment, fatigue, stress from high workloads, increasing number of people being diagnosed with mental health issues, violence and aggression, which I definitely want to touch on, and working remotely is more common, risks from that. So it's very much an evolving and growing area where everyone is learning quite a bit, I think. WorkSafe actually issued some guidance in 2025 on managing psychosocial risk. So that guidance is available now and might be something that you can make use of, or might have already. One thing I wanted to particularly highlight in this field is interactions with the public. That, unfortunately, is an increasingly dangerous area. Council staff and elected members, I'm sure, are having more and more aggressive approaches, both online and in person. Threats and aggression. And just last year, I believe it was, we had the Employment Court's decision in the Susie Wiles University of Auckland case, where the court found that the university did not do enough to keep her and her colleagues, who were threatened with all sorts of, you know, death and rape threats and people coming to their offices and so on. And the university hadn't done enough to mitigate those risks. Certainly a risk, I should call it a hazard actually, a hazard like that can never be absolutely eliminated, but an organization has an obligation to do what it can to mitigate those risks. Of course, there was a case more than a decade now in Ashburton where someone came to a WINS office with a gun, and MSD now has a security guard outside of every office. That's the sort of thing that can be taken in very serious cases of threats from the public, which, yeah, sometimes are just not thought about. I want to flag that because that case is very recent. Right, so the key duties. I'm sure you've all been introduced to the lovely, it's not even an acronym, PCBU. It's meant to be a concept that covers any kind of organization, whether it's a sole trader, a company, an incorporated society, a local authority, any type of organization that does work, has work sites that it controls. That organization, be it a council or a company, has the primary duty of care. Then officers, which are basically anyone who has a strong influence over what the organization does, be it company directors, senior management, elected members. Those are all officers, and they have an obligation of due diligence, which is ensuring that the PCBU that they influence, they have that influence over, and we'll talk more about this, that organization complies with its duties. Workers in turn, and anyone else who happens to come into your workplace, whether it's a courier driver or customers, they also have obligations to take reasonable care in relation to themselves and others in their workplaces. And anyone who is visiting someone else's workplace has an obligation to follow their health and safety procedures and so on, which is, I think, one of the reasons why you come to a new office and you're always told where the fire exits. Here's where we assemble and so on. Now, that primary duty of care is to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety of workers while they're working and others who are on the work site, as I mentioned. Now, that qualifier, so far as is reasonably practical, is of course a bit of a gray area. Deciding it means weighing up the likelihood of a hazard occurring, the degree of harm that might result from that hazard, which is essentially the risk, the severity of that damage that might be done, what the person who's considering the hazard and risk knows or ought reasonably to know about the hazard and the risk. What are your options for eliminating or minimizing the hazards, the controls that you can put in place to mitigate the risk of a hazard appearing? And of course, the availability and cost of those controls. So it's a matter of weighing up cost versus risk. It's never precise, and these things are always judged in hindsight, of course. So it is difficult. I certainly haven't come here today to tell you it's easy or black and white. I touched on this earlier. An officer who has the due diligence duty, that includes elected members, it includes company directors, which includes directors of CCOs, council controlled organizations. I understand that the Buller District Council has one CCO with its own set of directors. And having looked at that list, I didn't see that there were any elected members who were also on that board of directors, which means these elected members don't have a duty of due diligence towards the CCO. That is up to the board of directors and the management of the CCO itself. It's a potential overlap because quite often CCOs do have one member from the council, say, sitting on their board. And so in that case, the duty arising would be a matter of working out which hat the person was wearing at the time. People who are not usually officers are middle managers and below, and external advisors, consultants. It's a role-based definition. How much influence, how much authority do you have over the decisions that the organization takes, as opposed to just a title? I mean, there's one title that will guarantee that you're an officer, that would be chief exec. Anything below that, it would be a matter of how much influence. So, as officers of the council, elected members have the duty to exercise due diligence to ensure that the organization complies with its duties and obligations, as I mentioned earlier. So, what standard is that judged against? It's the care, diligence, and skill that a reasonable officer would exercise in the same circumstances, taking into account the nature of the business and the position of the officer, the nature of their responsibilities. As I touched on, an elected member is not an officer of a CCO necessarily. An important feature of this due diligence duty is it is an ongoing personal obligation, as distinct from the obligation of the organization itself. It's a positive and a proactive duty. It is, it's an area where you can't rely solely on delegation. There is a distinction that we need to talk more about, which is between governance and management, because elected members don't have to actually step in and manage day-to-day operations. It's more of a systems level check to make sure that there are appropriate systems, appropriate reporting, and oversight and monitoring. Company directors, on the other hand, have a slightly higher level of responsibility, which I will touch on. So in the law, there are 6 elements listed as part of that duty of due diligence. Elected members, in this case, must take reasonable steps to keep up to date with health and safety knowledge, understand council's operations and the risks at least a high level, obviously not a day-to-day level, must ensure that the organization has the appropriate resources and processes in place to manage those risks, ensure that incident reporting and response systems are in place, ensure that the council's legal compliance processes are in place. And something that's important that I'll be touching on later in terms of one of those key prosecutions is verifying that those systems are actually being used and are actually doing the job they're meant to. So this can provide a bit of a practical checklist. It's important for elected members to verify safety performance independently of management reporting. That's where independent audits and things can come into place, and I'll touch on that. Breaking it down further, knowledge, what does that mean? Keeping up to date. Obviously, you don't need a technical expert in every area of the council's operations. Councils have such a wide range of operations, from, you know, parks maintenance to building inspection to dog licensing to, you know, lots of office-based functions. And there's no way that you could possibly have expertise in all of those things. That is for the council staff to arrange, and I understand that that is something that the 1B BDC CCO, to use the 2 acronyms, looks after, is the parks and garden maintenance, and the second function I've already forgotten. Simon told me about these just earlier today. But yeah, keeping up with health and safety at a high level, at least at a sector level, keeping an eye on work safe guidance. Hopefully that's something that the council staff can bring to your attention as it comes out, like the new guidance on psychosocial risks. Reviewing any major incidents or accidents that happen in relevant industry sectors to see what lessons there are coming out of those. And staying informed about legal developments, such as key court decisions, which I will be talking about today. There's 2 sides of the coin when it comes to common failures at governance level. One is completely delegating, completely hands-off, entirely management's responsibility, don't take any interest. And on the other hand, getting too deep into managers' responsibilities and taking on responsibilities that actually sit with the organization. And that's a very fine line to walk, obviously. I think that the smaller the organization is, in my experience, the more governance does get involved in management because of the sheer size. There aren't 12 layers in between, sort of thing, that prevent governance getting their hands dirty, sort of thing, in big companies. But it's more about knowing the right questions to ask, and occasionally going around and verifying that things are happening. So yeah, refreshers like today on what the law is, what are current developments. That's the level of knowledge. Element 2, I already started talking about this. Understanding at a high level what the organization actually does. In this case, it would be a very wide range of operations. understanding the key operational risks at least a high level, thinking about the psychological health risks, and what are emerging risks coming, for example, from artificial intelligence or whatever the new developments are, or other technology advances. And it's worth keeping in mind as well that some council staff work on sites that are not actually council owned and controlled. And as I mentioned, when those workers go out to someone else's site, if they're going out, for example, to do a building inspection on a construction site, that person has an obligation to follow the health and safety procedures of that site that PCBU has set in place. But the council, is sort of a home base, also has an obligation to make sure that that worker is going to be safe when they're going into the work site that they're going into. So some of the questions to ask: what could seriously injure or kill someone in the different operational areas? What are the critical risks? What are the controls relied on to mitigate those risks? And how do we know that those controls work? Which is point 6 I'll be coming up to. How are we going in terms of, am I speaking too fast? I tend to speak.
Okay.
Good?
Yep.
Great, okay, thank you. I get on the roll. Element 3 of due diligence, resources and processes. And this is something that also came into question in the recent Ports of Auckland prosecution. It's up to those who control the purse strings to make sure that the organization has enough resources, money, staff, training, equipment, emergency planning, to make sure that the critical risks can be mitigated and that people are able to work safely. Warning signs of when that's not going right are budget constraints are getting in the way of safety, whether it's not enough PPE is being provided, or guardrails are not able to be put in place, that sort of thing. Maintenance might be deferred. There might be excessive workloads, which you can measure by the amount of sick leave and turnover amongst staff. If there are reporting systems that are not being used, is that because people aren't taking enough care? Do they not have enough time to report incidents? These are things that you can ask questions about. So it's important for any board to test whether the resources match the operational risk. And again, there's always going to be that tension between cost and safety obligations. And it's something that each organization must work out for itself, unfortunately. Element 4, incident reporting and response. So obviously, I'm sure it's on council meeting agendas, checking that the plans are in place and are being executed for near-miss reporting, incident investigations, corrective actions, worker engagement, review cycles, etc. And the reporting from council management should include critical risks, serious events, outcomes of audits, any information about the effectiveness of controls and where things might be changed, leading indicators where possible, rather than just lag indicators, and review cycles. So yeah, just relying on injury statistics is not enough. Good governance focuses on whether the critical controls that are in place are being used and whether they're being effective. Point 5, the compliance processes. So this is where elected members need to ensure that systems do exist. Again, the same things as we've been talking about before: risk management, worker engagement, contractor management in terms of where contractors are used to outsource work, potentially to the CCO or potentially to deliveries coming on site. There's a bit of management that can be done there in terms of putting good terms into contracts with those contractors around their obligations to meet the health and safety requirements of the council, to have certain certificates and that sort of thing. There's a lot that can be done through contract terms. Regulatory engagement. And the point here, it is about compliance, that having the policies and procedures alone that sit growing dust on a shelf, that's not enough. It's important that the reporting comes to the council, and that the council is actually seeking assurance that things are operating and operating well through audits, through the occasional site visit yourselves, maybe once or twice a year. I'm not sure what's appropriate for, you know, the exact operations you have, but occasionally board members, particularly those on risk or health and safety committees, occasionally do a walk around a site, check in with the workers. How are things going? Are there any issues here that we need to think about? Ensuring that workers are engaging through their toolbox meetings or you know, workplace committees, that sort of thing, and also getting independent verification from time to time. That is leading well into element 6, verification. And that's testing that the systems actually work in practice. The key question being, how do we know? We've got that policy in place, we've got that procedure in place. How do we know it's actually being used? How do we know it's actually effective? Again, the occasional site visits, but more likely getting independent audits, getting engagement from workers. Workers are your front line. They know what's happening out there on the job. They are your eyes and ears in terms of getting feedback from them, where they see the issues, what's working well, what could be improved. You probably have a dashboard of key indicators that you look at your regular meetings, doing the occasional deep dive into your really critical risks. And again, that external assurance. It is necessary for elected members to ask the questions, to not rely solely on management reporting, but to test it. A good comparison is actually in financial oversight. The board doesn't do the actual accounting and so on, but you know, sets the parameters and tests whether the financial systems are working. You know, by asking questions, looking at reporting, you know, asking for changes, that sort of level of oversight. It's again, it's this line between getting too involved, too hands-on, getting a little bit hands-on occasionally to make sure that what you're hearing is correct in terms of what's happening on the ground. Mostly asking the questions, getting the people in the council and the health and safety experts that they contract with to assure you that things are being done as planned. One of the key roles that you have as the board of directors, essentially as elected members, is to set the safety culture. You here shape the leadership behavior. You set the organizational priorities, the investment decisions, the reporting culture. If you have a commitment to continuous improvement that you demonstrate and you demand, then that is obviously setting the right tone. Some indicators of poor culture that you might see are repeated incidents. Why is something going wrong over and over? Why hasn't something been done to fix it? Under-reporting, possibly people are afraid to report. There might be a sort of a, you know, macho workplace culture, if you don't know. Production is always prioritized over safety. Or there might be a culture of blame also that means people aren't prepared to speak up because they'll simply have it, the issue blamed on them. This issue of work as planned or as imagined, sitting around the table versus what actually happens on the ground is very important, and it features in the Ports of Auckland's prosecution that I'm about to touch on. Some boards periodically actually meet with workers without management present to get their own direct insight into the safety culture. Obviously, it depends on the size of the organization, whether that's appropriate. But one thing you can certainly do is encourage anonymous reporting where possible. If there are any cultural reasons around why people might not be reporting hazards or issues, an anonymous type reporting option can deal with that. At national level, there's the Whistleblowers Act that provides that organizations need to have a way for whistleblowers to anonymously make complaints about things going wrong, and organizations must deal with those because sometimes people are worried about their job. So coming back to this issue, governance versus management. So just to emphasize this again, the Health and Safety at Work Act doesn't require you around this table to be operational managers. You don't need to personally supervise workers, run a toolbox meeting, operate equipment, manage compliance on a day-to-day basis. But you are sitting at that higher level role of high level of influence where you can lead the culture, set expectations, allocate resources, and then monitor systems. So you should be asking thoughtful questions, probing, as I mentioned, as you would do in other areas of management, like the finances. Make sure that independent and expert advice is coming to you, and make sure that you are monitoring performance of the system. Handy checklist. Some questions you might be asking around this table. Is health and safety a standing agenda item? I assume it is. Do you receive meaningful reporting? Are the critical risks clearly identified and reviewed regularly? Are significant incidents escalated promptly? And are corrective actions tracked through to completion? That's just set one. Set two, assurance. How is information verified? Are there site visits? Are there independent audits or similar independent visits that check that what you're hearing through reporting systems is accurate? How's the workplace culture? Are workers engaging in the systems that there are for them to engage in? Can they speak up safely? Are you and senior leadership visibly engaged? Are incidents being investigated? And what happens to the lessons coming out of incidents? Is there a learning culture where those lessons are then put into the system to help prevent issues happening down the track? Right, so when the rubber hits the road, when it all goes wrong, unlike company directors and directors of any other type of organization, individual elected members have a carve-out from criminal liability. So you are lucky not to face imprisonment or large fines like company directors do. That doesn't mean that you can expect. And I'd have to guess at why, but I imagine it's because, an elected member could come from any walk of life, can come in for 3 years, doesn't necessarily have any industry experience, it would be probably a bit unfair to hold, someone who's come in from as a teacher who's come in for 3 years, to personally being liable for something that happens, on a construction site sort of thing. Something like that, I imagine, is the reason you're not expected to have so much specific industry experience as you would if you were working your way up to being a company CEO or board member. So, and again, the distinction being that in turn, you are not liable for your CCO. It's the board of directors of the CCO that are responsible for it and that carry the risk of imprisonment or fines. The council itself, as the PCBU, as the organization, it faces potentially large fines of up to $600,000 for reckless conduct in respect of a duty. Other penalties include enforceable undertakings. There's always, of course, the adverse publicity and the operational disruption over even just a work-safe investigation. That part of the operation will probably need to be put on ice for at least a day or two, if not months, depending on the scale of the incident, which would be a huge operational disruption. So more costs there. Work-safe focus on systems, and you can't insure generally against health and safety penalties. You cannot contract out of them generally. The duties sit with the individuals and the bodies, respectively. Right, so the two key prosecutions over the last few years. Whakaari White Island disaster, let's call it, in 2018. 22 people were killed and injured, and 22 people were killed, many more injured. And WorkSafe initially charged 13 companies and individuals with breaches of the Health and Safety at Work Act. Several of the companies, tour companies, helicopter companies, they just pleaded guilty and accepted the fines. Others had charges dismissed. Some were found guilty by the district court. They tried to dispute it, but they were found guilty. But amongst those 13 organizations and individuals who faced charges, 3 of them were individuals, and those were the directors of Whakaari Management Limited, Andrew James and Peter Buttle. So I believe this is the first time that company directors were charged under the Health and Safety at Work Act. They were charged with failing to exercise the necessary due diligence as directors. Everyone was holding their breath to see what would come out of it, because I believe it was the first prosecution of its type. And interestingly, what happened is the district court judge dismissed the charges on the basis of insufficient evidence. It wasn't a not guilty finding. It was that there's not enough evidence to make a decision. It was a bit of a surprise, but the court held that there's a very, very high threshold for prosecuting a board member. And you as elected members don't even face that risk of prosecution. But basically, each director needed to be considered as an individual. The court would have to test whether that individual did all they needed to do or not to meet their duty. And there wasn't enough information. There weren't enough notes from board meetings. Court said the 3 of them might have had different levels of responsibility. One might have been pushing for more safety controls. One of them might not have been, and it might have been 2 against 1 in terms of wanting to spend the money. You just don't know. So that prosecution actually failed. And I am not aware of individual board members having been prosecuted since. It was the companies that really bore the brunt of the fines, the companies and the company chief executives. So there wasn't enough evidence as to whether board members had individually met their duties. So that was an interesting one, because if you were worried about individual prosecutions, that court decision actually said, there's a very, very high threshold here. And it's unclear how that can be met, because there's actually a perverse incentive in there for boards to not take good records. Yeah, I think they're still working through at a policy level how to deal with that. It's a bit of a gap we want to fill. I also want to touch on the recent Ports of Auckland prosecutions. The most recent decision just came out a couple of months ago. This is a case where a port worker was killed on the port site. He was involved in loading and unloading ships, and a container fell on him. No directors of Ports of Auckland were even charged. The organization was charged, and I believe pled guilty and had significant fines, fined over 560,000 plus costs. But Maritime New Zealand also prosecuted the CEO, Tony Gibson, on the basis that he had not met his duty. The two issues there were that he knew, as he should have, that there were certain risks, critical risks at the port, that were not being controlled adequately around containers being loaded and unloaded. It was known that there was a certain issue happening with lashes not keeping together and containers suddenly falling. The organization had been talking about how to mitigate the risk, but hadn't actually put anything in place in the meantime while they worked it through. And it was known that the port had difficulties with actually monitoring the work as done, as opposed to what's supposed to happen according to the policies and procedures. It was known that the night shift was particularly lax on safety. Sure enough, the two came together with someone on the night shift being killed by a container falling on them. So the district court did find Tony Gibson, the chief exec, guilty, said he didn't take timely action to address the issues, even though it was within his control and influence to do so. He was considering options, but in the meantime, hadn't put any controls in place. And Maritime New Zealand, in its press release after, said it hoped that this would serve as a strong reminder to chief executives and other officers that they do need to understand the critical risks of their business, to assure themselves through reliable sources that there are controls, systems in place, and to verify that those are working effectively to improve safety. Tony Gibson appealed, and that's the decision that came out just within the last couple of months. The High Court confirmed his conviction. It was legally safe. So you're in a relatively good position sitting around this table, because all signs are that in New Zealand, it's chief execs who really bear the most responsibility and will be held to the highest standards under health and safety law. They carry the weight on the shoulders. Yeah, they carry those personal liabilities. The council itself as an organization carries the risk of very high fines and penalties. It's really, you are relatively arm's length from the day-to-day action.
Thanks, Laurie. Laurie, we've got 15 minutes left, but then stand by. We've got a little time before the community meeting starts. So if everybody's happy to go over time, when Laurie's finished to ask questions, that's great. Everybody happy with that? Okay, back to Laurie.
There's just one more thing I wanted to touch on, which is the other thing that's been in the news the last couple of weeks, is the bill that's currently before Parliament to amend this legislation we've been talking about, which has got a fair amount of pushback just recently. The idea was to lessen the compliance costs in New Zealand, particularly on small businesses. It narrows down the obligations, so small businesses only need to deal with critical risks, which are those that potentially cause death or notifiable injuries. And that limited responsibility is what small PCBUs are held to, those with 20 or fewer workers. They would only be required to manage critical risk. As someone's pointing out, 97% of New Zealand businesses fall into the small category under that definition. So it's removing a huge amount of compliance potentially. It would slightly narrow officers' duties by focusing some of those broadly worded obligations like knowledge down to specifically knowledge of the organization's operations. There'd be more opportunity for industry bodies to develop codes of practice, and it prioritizes workplace functions as being number one guidance, codes of practice, 3 and enforcement is somewhere down the list. And the pushback over the last couple of weeks, you have no doubt heard of, because Pike River families have been leading the opposition to this because they say it would undo so many of the positive changes that were brought by the Health and Safety at Work Act after the Pike River disaster. So saw on the news this morning, there's been a meeting with Winston Peters. New Zealand First might ask for some changes to the legislation. We'll see where this gets to, what's actually passed before the election, or maybe it might not be passed before the election. We're in that period where you just don't know what Parliament's going to be doing. So I will stop there. That's all unknown. I will just mention something that was on the very first slide, and I think I put it again here. No, I didn't. I can only give general advice in this context. I cannot provide you with legal advice, particularly in open context. So please don't ask me any specific legal curly questions. We can always get back to you on those. But yeah, if you have any questions on what I've just been talking about that I might be able to answer, I will try.
Well, before everybody puts their hand up, okay. So we've got 10 minutes of this session left. Everybody happy? We go through until 1:15, and that'll give us 15 minutes before the community meeting. Great. Okay, so we'll start off with the Deputy Mayor, and then we'll go to Dave, Pause, and then Phil.
I've got 2 questions, Laurie, please. One is around when we make a decision around the table, particularly around cost cutting, like in maintenance, which we have done, and that's us weighing up our ratepayer costs against what we're doing. If that decision did have an effect that had a health and safety consequence, would it then be up to operations to come back to us with individual, if they're saying, well, we need to do this, but there is no money in the budget, but there is a health and safety risk. So it would be operational staff's responsibility to come back to us and notify us of that, to then allow us to make the decision around whether we spend outside of our budget.
Yeah, the pros and cons, what's the trade-off?
Yeah.
You want to cut costs? Yeah. What does that mean in terms of, potentially additional health and safety risk being taken on?
Yeah.
What are the options for mitigating that? Is it reducing, the work level? Is it, what are the, because you obviously you can't push the balloon in one direction without it popping out.
Yeah. The other question I had was around psychosocial. So, and what responsibility there is from, like, we're at this level of governance, but above us sits central government. And I would have to say right now, decisions being made in central government is putting so much pressure on our staff particularly in small councils, but also on us as a governance table, that, whereas if we had a staff member breaking because of workload, which we are seeing so much work being put on them right now, where is their responsibility in this? That, we can, because under legislation, we're having to make decisions and to go through processes. But in actual fact, our staff are so under the pump right now that you can see the load of the stress on them, and but we kind of have no power over that.
Yeah, I understand that.
Rachel.
Rachel.
Yep.
If a staff member pushed back with a PG on account of that, which, as you said, is driven by central government, because you're an employment lawyer as well, how would you see that all coming into the Deputy Mayor's picture?
Well, there is no responsibility, all care, no responsibility from central government. So it sounds to me like it's a situation where central government is pushing the balloon, it's popping out over here, and unfortunately, there's no additional resources or anything to help the council manage that. As far as I can see from my position, it's a matter for the council to decide, well, then what gets dropped? What gets dropped to make room for that extra work?
But then we put ourselves at risk on from another angle. That's the problem. It's like juggling balls right now.
That's a political issue.
I guess though, Laurie, that, you know, in the situation being described here, until, say, a council took a position arising from a PG and put it back to central government, that's when the test would be.
But there is no mechanism for holding central
No
government accountable.
legislation. Okay.
I mean, through the legislation, I mean, I'm the employer of staff, so
true.
it will be on me again.
Yeah.
As the employer of staff, so PGs are taken against myself or on behalf of the organisation, which I then answer.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Simon. Okay, Dave Hingston.
Thanks. Thanks for that great presentation. I sort of have a couple of questions related to what Shane asked, but also there's an emerging threat to councillors and to council staff. This has been evidenced. I'm just drawing on the MSD instance in Ashburton, and there's two areas that I wanted to focus on. One is the employment of council staff, the reception staff. They've been subject to vitriol and some sort of abusive behaviour. If that gets worse, my assessment is that the CEO would let us know the problems and then potentially come to us with a solution, which might be, say, security guards, like they did in the MSD case. And then what would be the result if we didn't pay for those security guards, didn't approve them, and then it goes back and something occurs? That's the sort of first part of it. And the other part is against us as councillors and or the mayor as well. There was threats in Greymouth last year against a councillor. There's threats now against a councillor in Waitaki, and they're death threats, both online and direct letters or statements. And the place of work for these councillors isn't just the chambers. They're being targeted everywhere they go, whether it's at home or in the environment. And what's the CEO's responsibility to us as councillors? And how can we mitigate against that? Would be sort of a general sort of question. And are there reporting procedures in place that the CEO tells us what is happening and advises us? Is that really sufficient enough, or does it need to come through risk and audit? Does it need to come through other reporting means, like online articles about other councillors?
Okay, let's start with first.
Is your microphone on? Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, remind me what the first one was.
The first one was risk spread against.
Yes, that's right, council staff members. And that's exactly what was happening with at University of Auckland with Susie Wiles and her colleagues in particularly in medical sciences, or with people who were upset around the COVID controls and so on, or didn't believe that it existed and that sort of thing. They had death threats, all sorts of threats. They were followed home. They had she had her home address, phone number posted online, and it came through email and by phone. So the university had an obligation to take steps to mitigate that. It should have got, first of all, an expert safety risk assessment done. There are actual security experts firms who will assess the different forms of threats and risks and recommend mitigation steps. What did eventually happen was the university funded a home security system for her and did monitoring of emails coming in, blocked a lot of them, and monitored the media to see when there were spikes in those sort of threats and things, and had an obligation to warn her that she might need to take extra precautions at that time. They put locks on all the floors in the buildings, so you could no longer just freely come in and wander around the science building, that sort of thing. So there are real steps that can be taken around personal safety. And again, it's an area where you can get experts to assess the risk. Maybe it is coming and going over time. Maybe it's something that you need to ramp up around the time, maybe that you get a threat, that you put stronger procedures into place, like, providing taxis to and from home to make sure that the person gets home safe. Home security systems. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Laurie,
So, it is responsible.
can I just ask on the back of that, there is new legislation going through now, in terms of harassment and that type of thing, that's being updated. I think that has a place in all of this as well. Can you talk very briefly about that at all?
Yeah, so if someone is receiving any sort of harassment, whether it's online or in person, it really should be reported to the police, because they will keep records of how many incidents. They'll be able to target how much resource they put into a particular individual, say, according to, the type and number of reports. They will go visit people at their homes who are accused of harassing, and let them know that the police has been reported to police and they're taking an interest. Online, you could report to, is it NetSafe, the regulatory body, who will also take an interest and potentially have like takedown orders and things like that around online safety.
I think that just quickly, that NetSafe has been the go-to place in the past. By reading of the new legislation, is that you can go straight to the police. The police have got new powers that they can start using from the get-go. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding, that this is a bit of a theme in regulatory change right now, is to diversify options rather than having a single option, as in the case of safety codes being developed only by WorkSafe. The legislative change is proposed that any industry bodies and so on can also produce these and have them recognized as the standard. I understand it's a matter of taking that sort of monopoly, as it might be perceived, away from NetSafe and providing more options for reporting. Yes, to police. We also know from the media that police are trying to get out of having sort of too many responsibilities, particularly when it comes to, say, call outs for mental health issues. They're trying to say this is not a police matter, it's some other government or agency matter. So I would hope that the police would be resourced appropriately to take on any new responsibility like that. Again, it's the matter of the balloon being pushed and popping out somewhere else potentially.
Thanks for that, Laurie. Councillor Rutherford. Oh, sorry.
Did have the second
Yeah,
part
second
that
one,
I'm
okay.
still looking at, which
Sorry,
is,
Dave.
we referred to the council staff, which, the CEO down there shoulders that heavy burden. But what about us? Nobody's going to stand up for us. If we get threats, or if we get attacked online, as we, there's a lot of emotion out there about rates rises and government reform and other central government changes as well, that they target individual people, whether it's the mayor or whether it's the councillors. What measures should we take? You mentioned talking to the police, but do we go to our risk and audit committee? Do we raise it there? Do we raise it at a council meeting? I just want to know how we would do it, because I see it as a real problem going forward that elected officials are getting targeted for trying to represent their community's point of view.
I live and work in Nelson. I remember the time when Nick Smith was had 1080 pellets thrown at him by someone who was anti 1080. So yes, elected members can certainly face risks out in public. I mean, just certainly this is your workplace. You're an appointee, not an employee or a contractor. So your status in law is different there. But I would assume that in your prioritizing of council resources and how they're spent under the health and safety budget, you may well be able to put some policies, procedures and funding towards equipment, that sort of thing, in relation to elected members.
Through the chair, there is, and you'll have seen the REM authority to have that allowance for you to put in security systems, for example. There's been a slight change to that which came out in the last couple of days, I think. But that is an option open to councillors. If you don't feel secure in your own home, you have that ability based on a risk assessment, a threat assessment. But yeah, that is
there's an allowance for equipment and then an allowance for monitoring as well. Okay, where are we up to? Councillor Rutherford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, thanks, Fiona. Look, I think the record would show that this table does take a reasonable oversight of health and safety in our organisation. However, I would say maybe not to the detail that some of your slides have suggested we could. So my question is, given that we sort of have almost immunity, as you rightly described, but our CEO doesn't. So let's just say a hypothetical situation where something occurred and our CEO was, thrown into would a defence for the CEO be that we did not, in fact, carry out our oversight of health and safety to the extent that maybe you have suggested and I will give just one quick example. To my knowledge, we've never undertaken site visits as an example. So you got any comment on that sort of?
with your microphone, please. Thanks.
Pause for thinking about that. One of the considerations that I touched on as to whether an officer is meeting their duty is what's reasonable in the circumstances. I'm just going to pull that out and get the wording. What is reasonably practicable, what the person knows or ought to know, costs and availability. I'm looking for something else then. Find what I'm looking for. So would it be a defense? The resource constraints to some extent could be raised in this defense. I did the best I could with what I had. The people who hold the purse strings just didn't spend the money. But on the other hand, there's a very clear operational duty towards the council staff that the chief exec has to make sure that, his or her worker, the team is kept safe. And so where he observes that there are not sufficient controls in place due to lack of money or, lack of other form of due diligence, that should be an operational matter where, as I said, decisions might need to be made about reducing service level or, finding other ways to try to mitigate the increased risk that arises.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. I know that's not a perfect answer necessarily, Phil, but okay, Councillor Reynolds.
I'm well aware we're looking at the health and safety at work aspect here, but no area should be exclusive in my view, and that we all have a duty of care to each other. In our case, we live in an area where we have a demographic of very low income ratepayers who are under stress paying their rates. Some of them, rather than be confronted with the stress of not paying rates, eliminated their insurance, which is a very unwise decision, which could leave them homeless if they have a fire. What duty of care do we have towards that segment of our ratepayer base?
It's not a legal liability.
Just a moral
They're
one.
not on work sites. So work site, if you're work for council, no, that would be more about moral duty.
Microphone, please, Laurie. It's all right, we all do it.
Yeah, that would be a moral duty rather than a legal duty. I'm trying to think, most councils have rates. What's the word? Pushing polls on rates, that ratepayers could apply for. I don't know, but I mean, I guess the trade-off for a lower rates intake is in turn a lower level of service.
Thanks, Laurie. Councillors, we've got 10 minutes and we've got 2 people to ask questions. So we'll just keep it to those 2 people at the moment. If we've got time after that, we'll see what time we've got left, if that's okay. Okay, so Councillor Hawes.
And I did have a few, but like I'll narrow them down as much as I can. So like having come from my workplace before I retired, was Department of Conservation. I sit around listening to interest that these health and safety organisations really gets driven top down. And you notice that in Department of Conservation too, whereas really the safety is from the bottom up, basically. And what I noticed was that, you know, all of a sudden we talk about staff, we immediately think about putting barricades up around offices and the way that well, that's what happened in Dock. Locks went on doors, security cameras went on office car parks, etc., and yet the majority of the actual working staff were out in the field. They were forced to wear a uniform, highly labelled, screaming, "I'm Dock, here I am." They drove vehicles that had all the same stuff on them, and they were sent forth. And that was through that anti-1080 serious threat process. So what that message said to me as the supervisor of a group of staff was, we don't give a shit about you people on the ground. You're expendable in individual circumstances, but the office staff are highly protected. So, you know, my point being, when I listened to this and I listened to the discussions, immediately focused around, you know, shouldn't we be removing our identifications from vehicles? Shouldn't we actually be having plain vehicles if there's a threat to staff? Shouldn't we be removing labels and things that say Buller District Council staff member? Shouldn't they be able to be, you know, give them some sort of ID so they can carry it around and display it, but, you know, remove the labelling. So anyway, that's my first point, and if you've got anything to comment on that, that's fine, but I think there's a hell of a lot goes amiss through that. So the other part was, how about Mount Maunganui campground? We had campgrounds in our area that we're responsible for, operated by subcommittees, which effectively then become, you know, part of our operation. How will that impact on health and safety requirements around operating campgrounds, and what is the potential for, consequence?
That reminds me, I think that was something that Simon touched on with me this morning, that are the recreational areas actually managed by the CCO, or they?
No, so we're talking about so the CCO operates Buller Recreation, so that's a facility.
Not the campgrounds.
What Councillor Dave's talking about is the campgrounds which are under the so actually the subcommittee themselves, so that's not CCO. So
I just want to double check just in case there was an easy answer, which was it's not your problem. But no. Yes, no, there absolutely is a responsibility to ensure safety of any council staff working there, staffing the place, doing maintenance, and to make sure that the site is safe in terms of hazards, which include, landslides, physical hazards, or, rivers that overflow.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks,
so
thanks.
it's important then that we have that managed. And so the other thing that I thought about is what level of reporting. Now the question is around what level of reporting we as council laws should, around health and safety, should we expect to come across through our meeting or our workshop processes? What level of analysis and feedback and should we be expecting?
Yeah, I think, Dave, that's probably not so much a legal question, more so an operation governance question, because the legislation will be quite clear what the responsibilities are, how we actually, correct me if I'm wrong, how we actually get there is something that we've got to be responsible for.
Yeah. you
Not
sound
quite
like
the
you're at
question.
risk.
The question I was asking was, is there a legal, if it push came to shove and we were seen not to have any physical process coming regularly across our radar, how would that affect our legal liabilities?
Yeah, reporting, ensuring the systems in place and ensuring that the incident reporting and so on is coming to you. Sounds like there's a risk committee that takes the lead on that.
Yeah.
That's necessary to be coming to you, so that you can have that confidence that the systems are in place and that they're working.
Yeah, so just through the chair very quickly, I think to pick on Dave's point. So today, obviously, that every RAP committee, you do get that regular health and safety. So it will address all those incidents that we've had, any notifiable ones, and what the process is following up, and you can see the trending. And the other item that you'll have on the agenda today is the health and safety framework document, which is that handbook, which gives you that overall, really detailed deep dive into what we have in terms of process, procedure, and you'll see it's very, very detailed, and that's really why we wanted to bring it to you. And it's just, it's ideal. It's just intersected with with Laurie's talk today. It wasn't intended that way, but it was a happy coincidence. So it's been good that you can hear from Laurie and then see the reporting that you've got in the agenda today at RAC, but also the process through the handbook that we use to drive a good health and safety culture, and my responsibilities as CE.
Thanks for that, Simon. Now we're just about out of time, but we've got the last on the list at the moment is Tony, Councillor O'Keefe.
So on that, in last trimester, we had a charter attached to our meeting. And that's got here core councillors' roles and responsibilities. And it's noticed there's not health and safety actually mentioned on that. That's also been removed from our meetings front page as well. Would you recommend that be a focus?
It does need to regularly be on council meeting agendas. Yes, it becomes that oversight role, same as financial.
I was just saying, even on the opening page of agendas, the first page, it's got it sort of like your core councillor role and responsibilities noted out there. It's sort of spelled out to you every single meeting. Do you think that would be advisable, just to sort of bring it into our? I think that would be advice.
Actually, I can guess at why that wasn't there. It might not be there because of emphasizing the difference between the operational level focus versus governance level, but
I think it was on the previous, we had it on the previous triennium agendas, like a charter, but it wasn't, yeah, I don't know, we just removed it. It wasn't, Caitlin, can you remember, was it just removed because it wasn't resolved?
So it was adopted by the previous Trinium's council. It wasn't discussed by this council at all.
No, the question being, do you think that having that spelled out to us as councillors every meeting is just the opening page would just bring? Yeah, that's what yeah.
Thanks, Tony. I think that quite nicely moves into risk area, for the council, whether it be staff, councillors, whatever. So we'll ask Rachel to have the final word as risk chair on that.
Sorry, just one really quick question. So new bill coming through, privately developed industry code of practice. So somebody council contracts to a private sector
person who's operating under the private code of conduct or, the code of practice, there's a fatality or similar matter as a result of someone, even though they're following the rules. So you've got council here, you've got private sector here, they follow the private sector developed thing, and in spite of that, there's been a fatality or serious incident. Is there the potential to do the deep pockets thing and jump back to council who had a different and possibly potentially a higher standard, or at least a different code of practice, if their own staff have been doing the job?
That's an interesting question, the intersection between,
Laurie.
It's an interesting question, the intersection between two different PCBs, policies and procedures and practices. My guess would be that it may be WorkSafe doing the investigation rather than someone individually suing, because we don't have that in New Zealand generally. But which would WorkSafe hold to? Possibly the higher one, if there was a total overlap. But I can't say for sure. It's an interesting question. I know it's an issue, it was raised with me the last couple of years, where mines inspectors from government go into mines with their warrants and do inspections and potentially don't follow the mine safety protocol, which they should, because they are walking onto that work site. It has an extra high level of, health and safety procedure around it, but yet apparently some people are coming on not following that. Yeah, I can't honestly answer the question, which approach would WorkSafe take, because I'm not sure.
Would you say it would be prudent, therefore, for council when they contract out to a private sector, and when they have been they get a private sector in to do a job instead of their own people doing it, they would be prudent to have within that contract that the private sector staff have to work under the council's code of practice?
Could do,
As-
yeah,
as-
yeah, like
as-
rubbish collectors
in the
or
contract
that
as well.
sort.
Yeah, the contract, Rachel's I've been involved in is that, if you bring a contractor on, et cetera, as a minimum, you have to work under that site, health and safety, but as a minimum. So if you've got something over and above that, that's the expectation, from your own board of directors, say, or whatever. But that's something that I've built into contracts over the years as well, to sort of safeguard your own organisation. We're going to have to wrap it up now.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just one really, really important question. And it does relate to our role and responsibility. We have recently reduced our risk and audit committee. It's no longer all of council. And it is the reduced committee that these reports come to. So some of us at this table are not actively involved in that process of ensuring that the health and safety systems and et cetera are in place, and all those tick boxes. And as a consequence, our normal council meetings do not include reports on those matters. Have you got any comment on that?
Do the committees not report to the?
Yes, they do. I think what you're touching on, Phil, is not necessarily, I know you're asking a legal question, but that's more, I think, an internal issue as to how the information is received by risk and audit, assessed by risk and audit, and brought back to the council, because all of those reports that are made available for risk and audit, are available for council as well. We're going to have to wrap it up here, guys. Now, we could probably sit here all afternoon with heaps of questions, because I've got quite a few too. But if I can just say, if there are any more questions on this, we'll have a session on health and safety at RAC this afternoon. We could perhaps touch on them then. Otherwise, come back to Simon, and Simon can coordinate any further work that we would like to do with Laurie. So, Laurie, thank you very much for travelling and your time. It's been very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a great